All right, everyone. This is going to be a hopefully not too long version of not the critique, the lecture from the week 7, which would have been February 20th. That's the day we had a snow day. So I'm going to record basically the same stuff that I went over in my Tuesday classes so that you guys aren't completely missing out. And I'll try to cover all the same topics or comments that I wanted to make during those other two classes' lectures. So the main thing I wanted to talk about this week is just what to do with your animation or how to improve your animation after you've already done blocking for a shot. So we already know that blocking is kind of methodically just going through the reference footage and creating the timing and the poses from the reference footage, but that's not the end of the story because you're going to have to end up making the animation look more appealing and more visually interesting before it's actually done. Otherwise, it's basically just like motion capture, and even motion capture has editing done to it after it's been recorded. So what I have here is an example scene where I just blocked in very quickly with my character this little snippet of reference footage that I showed in class last week. And this is just a quick block using the every 3 frames method. So there's a keyframe on every controller every 3 frames. And I haven't cleaned it up or anything, so what I want to look at is how I could make this look more interesting using the blocking that I already created. So first, just a reminder about the 12 principles of animation. We haven't really discussed those too much this term because we've been mostly doing story development and rigging and stuff like that. But we need to keep these, we need to move these back to the front of our brain now that we're in the thick of animating. So you don't have to necessarily memorize them, but the more you are thinking about them, the more you'll be able to make decisions about what to actually change. Because trying to edit this isn't just going to be something that's really obvious or straightforward, or there's not going to be a guide for specific things to do to make each bit of animation look better. You are going to have to literally make decisions about why you want to change something or what you should do to make it look better or different. So a lot of those decisions are going to be made by thinking of the 12 principles of animation. So should I add more of a squash and stretch to this action? Should I add more anticipation to this action? Should there be a better arc? And those are more practical things, like I could look at this and say I want there to be a better arc on the arm when he places the skull on the ground. So that's kind of a more like concrete example of where you'd make that decision. But it could also be something like staging or appeal or whatever, where I want to rotate him more towards the camera so that we can see more of the front of the character, and then the audience will connect with him better. So that's the first thing I wanted to bring up is 12 principles of animation are back, and you got to make sure that you are, if not memorizing them, then at least referencing back to a list of them so that you can use those to make decisions while you're animating. So, in addition to the 12 principles of animation, I also wanted to talk about a few other concepts that will help you enhance your poses. Now, part of refining animation is just tweaking the timing, and that's kind of a more straightforward concept of this part needs to happen faster, so I'm going to condense the keyframes closer together, or vice versa. But the other element is literally improving the actual poses that are happening in the animation. And there's a few different ways that we can break this down, and some of that stuff is going to be on BB Learn, and I put a few PDFs and stuff on the animation reference folder here. So the three main categories that I want to explain, and these are in addition to the 12 principles of animation. So these are not principles. These are not one of the 12 principles. These are things that go in connection with the 12 principles. So the first one is body language. And what we want to think about with body language is making sure that we're using the most recognizable pose, the most recognizable gesture, in order to convey an emotion or a thought. So that could mean simply thinking about what emotion your character is supposed to be feeling, because pretty much every shot and every animation in your story, there's obviously some sort of emotion that your character is feeling, whether it's boredom, whether it's fear, whether it's happiness, whatever. It needs to be conveyed through their body language. And chances are you already kind of have that in there a little bit because of your reference footage being filmed. So when you're filming out your reference footage, you're just inherently kind of using body language. But you need to think about it even further than that while you are trying to fix up your animation. So there are three core emotions that at least mostly are consistent throughout, I guess you could say, psychology studies, but basically all other emotions are rooted in some combination of happiness, sadness, fear, anger, disgust, and surprise. And each one of those 6 things has a distinct type of body language that goes with it. Here's another example. I just found this on DeviantArt or something through a Google search, but I liked the poses and the gestures. And as you can see, even if you couldn't read the labels on these, you should still be able to tell pretty easily what this character is feeling. And the reason for that is because humans all use the same body language when they're expressing emotion. So in order to make your animation better and also easier to understand, and third thing, also easier for you to figure out what to even do in the animation, you want to be making sure that you're hitting the correct body language. Now there's a PDF in here. Dave Moriello made this, not me, but I use this pretty much every time I teach this class. So there are general kind of rules about body language, about when you're happy, you tend to be more relaxed. You tend to have your limbs and your head more outwardly projected from your torso, as opposed to if you were sad, you would be more closed off. Your head would be drooping down. You'd have your limbs and your head closer to your body. And these are just stock photos, but they're actually, they're goofy, of course, but they are pretty helpful for kind of distilling down what emotional body language looks like. And there's one other thing about body language, and that is I'm going to skip this slide, but just gestures. So these are kind of separate, or not exactly the same thing as emotional body language, but this is more like what is the most straightforward and universally understood way that you could show a character thinking something or reacting to something. And that's going to be body language, as we just talked about it, but also gestures. So if I came up to you randomly and I said, I'm filming reference footage for my animation and I need my character to be, I need reference of my character coming up with an evil plan. And I just say, go, do it right now, I'm filming. And the first thing that you might do is, put your fingers together and tap them like Mr. Burns from The Simpsons. So, or if I came up to you all of a sudden out of nowhere and said, I'm filming reference footage, I need you to, play a character who's telling me that I did a nice job. And then you might just give thumbs up. Or do this, like these two. Jackie Chan seems to be doing a lot of gestures. So the idea here is that if you are trying to make your character have a certain thought or a certain emotion, and there is a gesture for that that exists already in our culture, then you should probably use that somewhere, unless you have a different way of conveying it. But, you know, there's a whole bunch of these listed here that are something as simple as, you know, putting your head in your hand represents frustration or exhaustedness. You know, pinching your nose means that something is gross. Obviously, most of our robots don't have noses, but whatever. Wagging a finger meaning no, or something like, you know, wagging, putting your finger over your lips meaning be quiet. All these sorts of things are going to be essentially shortcuts to making sure your character feels like a real person, and also making sure that the audience feels like they are watching an actual character who behaves like a real person. So that's what I have to say about body language. Silhouette, that's the second one here. Silhouette, obviously we all know what a silhouette is. These are silhouettes, and also these are silhouettes. It means that each pose should be clear to the camera, to the meaning that we should be able to see, you know, the outline of the character, the design of the character, just from this blacked out silhouette, and that we can see important details of the pose not being obscured by other parts of the body or whatnot. It also means that you want to make sure that your poses look intentional. So a good silhouette usually does not come from accidentally creating a pose without thinking about it. You kind of have to think about how you're posing your character in order to make a good silhouette. So here, you know, we can all tell that this is the Hulk, even though the word Hulk isn't on here, or there's not even, this isn't green and purple or anything. But we can still tell it's the Hulk, and even if you didn't know who the Hulk was, you'd still know that this is a big, beefy dude who's kind of attacking you. So that's all just from the silhouette here. And same thing with, you know, this Daffy Duck in detective costume. We can't see literally every detail in silhouette form, but that's not what it's about. It's more about the fact that there's a clear outline of his costume and his pose. We can see all the important information. We can see that he's holding out this big prop. We can see there's cool negative space happening in here with the pipe in the hand and all that sort of stuff. So the fact that we can't see, you know, his other hand or whatever isn't really important. Now, I don't have much else to say about silhouette, but I do want to show you one thing. I think I might have shown this in class last term if you were in Animation 1 with me, but if I wanted to, I could go into Maya and I could open my render setup. And we are going to talk more about using the render setup for actual rendering in like week 9 or 10 or both. But for now, I'm just going to really quickly create a render setup layer. And I cannot spell the word silhouette for the life of me. And then I'm going to create a collection. And I'm going to add my robot geometry, and I'm going to add my prop. And on this, I'm going to create a shader override and then put in a surface shader. And now, when I view this this collection or this layer, then I see it all just as this solid black silhouette, and that's what a surface shader is. So there's no lighting. This can't be affected by lighting or anything. It's just all a solid color. So I could even make this a different color silhouette if I felt like it. And that's, you know, this has other uses in rendering, like creating a mask for alpha masking things. But for animating, we can create a render layer that shows us the silhouette. Now it is a little bit annoying because as far as I can tell, there's no real way to have a shortcut for this other than clicking these two buttons. Maybe somebody can find that out, but unfortunately, that's the one downside of this technique, but it is still very useful. So that's silhouette. And third thing here, line of action. So we should, in most important poses, be able to kind of trace an imaginary line through the main part of the character, and the pose should all kind of reinforce this curve that's leading the pose. And we want to avoid having limbs or props break off from the line of action at sharp angles, at least not unintentionally. And the line of action will usually direct the viewer's eye towards whatever the character is looking at or moving towards or interacting with. So, back here again, if you look at these cats, the left-hand side is a bad pose because there's bad lines of action. So this pose is very disjointed and going off at different angles for no reason. The parts of the body, like the arms and the tail and the head, don't really support the overall pose. And same thing with this guy. He's not leaning into the punch. His arm is just shooting off from the body at a weird angle. And it's not a very cohesive curve. Versus this pose, this line is going all the way from the base of the foot up to the fist. This whole thing is kind of forming this smooth line. The head is pointing towards that. This arm is kind of shooting out in a way that points towards that. And it doesn't mean you're like breaking your character to make them fit into a curve. It just means that you're designing your pose so that it doesn't end up like this. And then same thing with this, here, the whole body is kind of tracing along this imaginary curved line, rather than his arm like shooting off here or back here or whatever. And then same thing with these examples. And as a 3D example, here's one where this is a boring pose because the character is completely straight up and down. Their arm is just sticking out at a 90-degree angle. This arm is doing nothing. There's very minimal adjustment of the original pose, the T pose. Versus this, where the overall body is leaning towards the direction he's pointing. The head is adjusted. More parts are adjusted. This arm is rotated and doing something more interesting than just sitting down at the side. There's body language going on, and even the arm that's pointing is not just shooting straight out. It's pointing while still kind of all going through an imaginary line. So both of these are pointing, but there is a big difference between this pose of the character pointing and this pose of the character pointing. And it comes down largely to line of action. Here there is no line of action because it's just up and then out. Here it's all kind of flowing up in this direction. Here's one thing about line of action that can also help. Check this out. So in Maya, there is a thing called the grease pencil tool. So if I go to View, Camera Tools, and Grease Pencil tool, I can create a grease pencil. Oh, hello there. What just happened? That's a little strange. That did not happen last time I tried that. Somehow my camera flew 1,000,000 feet away. Oh no, not this thing again. Okay. Let me just try... What the heck? Okay. Well, when I was doing this in the lab computers at the school, this was working fine. I'm not really sure what the deal is here, but maybe I should try this on a different camera. We always got to try some variables. So I can't give up if I haven't actually tried anything other than the first step. Maybe you just can't do it on the perspective camera. Perhaps that's it. Now it does seem like my settings are a little weird here. Slightly strange. Yeah, this was... There must be some settings that I'm not aware of, because this was not what it was doing in class on Tuesday. Huh. Is there a brush size for this? There is a brush size, but I don't know. Well, that's a little bizarre. I was kind of hoping that this would work, you know, the way it's supposed to. I don't want to get too carried away with this, since I just want to continue talking about what I was talking about. Oh, now all of a sudden it's working. When in doubt, reset. I guess use the pencil instead of soft pencil. But yeah, so you could use the grease pencil tool, which hopefully will work better if you try it, to kind of follow the line of action through various parts of your pose and make sure that there is a line of action, and to help you figure out if there's a way that you can improve that line of action. Now, just keep in mind the grease pencil tool sticks to the camera, so it's not going to follow along with your character or anything like that. And I'll just I'll just delete these frames for now. I might bring the grease pencil tool back later. So I think oh right, a few more things. One is asymmetry. So making sure that your character is not exactly the same on both sides of its body all the time in various poses. You want to try to intentionally make it so that your character is not symmetrical, and that includes by having it lean in one direction or the other, rotating various parts of the body towards or further away from the camera to give it more dynamic posing, looking again at the negative space between the body and the arms and stuff like that. Even just here, just naturally by default, the legs are different because the character is leaning like this. Or it could be a little bit more subtle. So, you know, here they are kind of doing this mirrored pose, but even in that, it's not exactly the same in terms of like the body direction, the shoulders, the head, even little stuff just like the fingers and whatnot. So you don't want to have animation that looks like it's just copied on from one side of the body to the other. And last thing, which I don't really want to cover too much of because it's a little vague, but center of gravity. Making sure that your character is balancing itself as it's going throughout the various actions. And part of the reason that we want to use reference footage is because you can figure that out. But even if you're using reference footage, you have to make sure that your pose in Maya is matching the correct center of gravity. So that mostly just involves how the feet are positioned when a character is walking versus carrying something versus jumping versus balancing on something else. It's not always going to be the same thing, and how the limbs or the other body parts are going to be distributed will shift depending on where that center of gravity would actually be located. And one way that you can kind of start to figure this out if you need to is kind of acting like there's this plastic army man base thing underneath your character, and trying to figure out where the center of gravity would be on that. So if I was looking at this animation that I have now, if I, if I picked this one frame, or, some random frame, and I went like this, and then now I'll use the grease pencil tool again. Maybe I'll change the color too. And I kind of traced an imaginary base around this. The center of gravity would kind of be over here, and right now the feet are back here. So I would need to make it so that the center of gravity is at least like balanced around this area. It would probably be clearer if I was doing a different color. Which might mean that I have to like move that leg forward, or maybe this leg is too far back, and maybe I have to just move the whole character back a little bit to balance that, so that now the center of gravity is more like, is more around here, and now that's more reasonable. And again, there's no, it's hard to get this exactly because it's not an exact science. Well, I guess it is an exact science if we're talking about actual science, but as far as animating goes, it's more of a thing that you either have to get intuitively, or you have to make sure you're thinking about it more than you might have been before. So you can keep looking through this PDF. There's also some stuff at the end about walk cycles and whatnot. And how that changes the center of gravity, as well as things like the hips and various other parts of the body. Speaking of which, I also have another PDF up here, which I kind of created. I just scanned, or rather took photographs of a whole bunch of pictures from the Animator's Survival Kit, and I picked ones that were useful for people in this class. So I have a whole bunch of, this is like 25 pages or something, but I picked out parts that are more about fundamental body movements and getting good animation out of things that you might have already filmed reference footage for, and making it look better there. So feel free to look over this PDF and try and use some of that information. One last thing, I do have this video that I already recorded for a different class, which goes over the process of animating a parent constraint on and off, so that we could end up doing, picking up a prop off the ground and then throwing it, and or putting it down, or whatever else needs to be done. So you can watch this video to remind yourself how to do this process. Alright, so this is part 1 of the lecture, so I'm going to pause this video and then upload a second video that's separate of me actually doing some animation stuff to this shot. Excuse me. Alright, so make sure to watch that video too.